Hi everyone, it's Narelle here with part 2 of our Cricut Meets Mixed Media series. In this video I'm going to explain the difference between gesso and texture paste and how we can use both of those, and I'll also give you some different ways of colouring them. So first up is gesso. So gesso is basically a primer. It prepares your surface for other mediums like inks or paints. So if you were to spray or drop some ink onto this piece of paper here, on this side here, you'll see that the ink would just be absorbed right into the paper and you'd see it on the back side there. So I'll show you that. So I've just got some Dylusions ink here. So I'm going to just drop some on there, and you can see that it's gone straight through the back because it's been absorbed by the paper. Now on this side here I've actually got some gesso, and it's been there for a while, it's dry. So I'm going to again do the same thing. I'll just drop some ink on there, and you can see that it's not being absorbed like the other ink was, because the gesso is stopping it being soaked through. So if I turn that over now and you can have a look at the back, you can see that it hasn't gone through. The gesso has stopped that being absorbed into the paper. So that's one of the reasons that we use gesso, is just to protect what's underneath. So apart from the white gesso that I've just used, and there are many different types of white gesso, lots of different brands, I have a few. They range in price from quite inexpensive to more expensive, and that really just depends on the brand and what they've actually done to make them good, or better than some of the others. So what I'm going to be using for our projects is the gesso that I made yesterday. So, but apart from the white gesso, you can also get coloured gesso and clear gesso. So this one here is a black coloured gesso, and I use this one quite a lot for mixed media canvases. So I'll give you a bit of a look at one of those. So this is a mixed media, this is the first mixed media canvas that I ever did, and I did this one in a class that was done by the lovely Barbara Stewart, and this is the project that we did in that class. Now the first thing that we did there was we painted the canvas, because it's a white canvas. We painted the canvas with black gesso, and then we dried that, and then we went on to add more dimension and things like that. So that's black gesso is really good for those sorts of projects. If you're looking to do a project that you want to be really bright and summery or springish, then white gesso is probably where you should start. The other thing that you can do is you can use clear gesso. Now that's really useful for things like if you wanted to use some printed paper like this as the background or the back layer of your project, and you didn't want to cover it with white or black gesso because you wanted to still be able to see the pattern. So in that case you would use clear gesso. Now it's a bit difficult to see, but on the top half of this piece of paper I've got clear gesso there, and the bottom doesn't have any, so there's not really that much of a difference in the color. If anything, it's made the top just a little bit deeper in color. So that's what you would use clear gesso for. So now that we've discussed gesso, we'll go on to texture paste. So as with gesso, there are lots and lots of different types of texture paste, and I'm including in that modelling paste because they are pretty much the same thing, and they can both be used for the same purposes. Texture paste is used mainly to help build 3D dimension. So for example, in this card here, I've used a stencil that I've placed on my piece of cardstock. I've laid the stencil down, and then I've used a spatula and I've wiped texture paste through that stencil, and it's given, and then when I lift the stencil off, I get the nice raised effect of the stencil that I placed on there. So in this one here, I actually used this Stone Effect texture paste, and it really does, close up, it really does look like actual brick, so it's a really great product. But you could use the texture paste that we make to do pretty much exactly the same effect. It just wouldn't have those little bits of grains of, and it's almost like sand. So I'm wondering if one of the things that we can try to recreate this card is find something that we can put in our texture paste to get that similar effect. So we'll be definitely working on that. But that's basically what your texture paste is doing. It's just building up 3D dimension. So now that we've gone through the two differences, what we'll do is we'll go through how you actually use these products. Okay, so let's start with gesso. So as I said, we use gesso mainly to prime our surface, and you can see here that I've already done that on this sheet of green cardstock, and I've applied the gesso in two different ways. So this one here I've used a brush, and this one here I've actually used an old gift card or credit card. Now there are lots of different things you can use to apply your gesso, things that you might already have around the house. So as I said, you can use gift cards, you could use an old butter knife. I'm sure that you can find other things that you can use, but the other thing that you can do is there are products specifically made for applying these products. So for example, you have the plastic spatulas, you have metal spatulas that you can purchase, and you might even have something like this sitting beside your Cricut. So these are both, these two are Cricut spatulas, which you can use those just as easily. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to use this gift card, and we're going to apply some gesso to this piece of cardstock here. So I'm going to use the gesso that I made, and I'm first going to give it a quick stir, just because, as I explained before, that sometimes the liquid does rise to the top in this one, and I haven't noticed that happen in any of the bought gessos that I've got. But anyway, so I've stirred that up, so I'm just going to get my credit card or gift card, whatever you're using. I'll just take some out of there, and then I can just smooth that on like that. And that's one way of applying your gesso. Now it doesn't have to be perfect. If you want to use your gesso to also give your page a little bit of dimension, by all means you can, do all sorts of things to get your dimension, or you can make it as flat as you like. Okay, now it doesn't have to be super thick, because remember we're only laying down a base coat, so you could do that and scrape most of it off and you're still protecting the surface underneath. Okay, but I generally like just to have a coat that I can actually see quite well, and then I just try and smooth it out as much as possible. Okay, so that's using a credit card or a gift card. Clean up for gesso and texture paste basically is just water, and it's much easier to clean these things off when it's actually wet. So if you're using, say I was using my spatula and I was doing that and I wanted to go quickly onto something else and I didn't have time to clean my spatula, I just pop it into a jar of water, and whilever that liquid or that texture paste or gesso stays wet, it's still going to be able to be removed easily. So that's why I always have a nice pot of water sitting there. The same would go for this credit card. You can also clean these off with wet wipes or paper towel, so that's another way of quickly cleaning them. So I'll just put that one to the side, and then we'll go on and we'll use a brush. So all different sorts of brushes. You've probably got kids' paint brushes at home that you can use. So just depends on how big a brush. Obviously a bigger brush is quicker, but again we're just painting it on to prepare that surface. And again, I'll just pop this brush straight into the water, and then I can give it a bit of a swoosh around, and then I can finish cleaning that later. So all different sorts of brushes can be used, but obviously the bigger the brush, the quicker that's going to cover your surface. There are other things on the market that you can get in brushes, and this is a silicone brush. It's not a brush as such, as that it's actually a piece of silicone, but it can also be used to apply. In fact, it does a really good job, and this one comes in a couple of different sizes. So that's how you can apply your gesso. Drying time isn't too bad. You can use a heat gun to quickly dry that off. Just don't get your heat too close to it or the gesso will bubble, and kind of keep moving it. It's different to if you were using, say, embossing powder, and with embossing powder you kind of concentrate it on one spot and wait for that to melt, and then you'd move on to the next spot. With these kind of products, just keep the heat gun moving around so that you're distributing the heat all over, and it doesn't really take that long. Obviously the thicker you put it on, the longer it's going to take to dry. So whereas this bit here is probably quite almost dry now, this bit here that I put on quite thick is going to take a little bit longer. But you can, if you don't have a heat gun, that's fine. You can do this part of your project, put it to the side and let it dry naturally. So, and it doesn't really take that long. Okay, so that's using gesso. So next we'll move on to some ways of using texture paste. Right, so texture paste, how do we use that one? Well, the most common way to use texture paste is to put it through a stencil. So what I have here are some homemade stencils, and these have been cut out of laminate sheets that have gone through the laminator with nothing in them, and then they've gone through a Cuttlebug using some dyes. I'm not sure of the brand of the dyes of these ones. So that's what that one was done. This one here is also a laminating sheet, but in this case it's actually a design that I created from images in Cricut Design Space, and I cut them out on my Explore. So it's very easy to make homemade stencils, but of course you can go and buy stencils from many different places in many different brands and at many different or as expensive as you want them to be, basically. So I have a couple here. So what we'll do is we'll use each of these just to see how they go. And what I'm going to be doing is using this card here and my homemade texture paste. So I've just been and given it a good stir, and we are ready to go. So let's start with this heart-shaped one here, and we'll just grab some like this. Now you need to hold your stencil down. You don't want it to move, and you want it to stay flat to the surface so that the embossing paste doesn't go underneath. So what we'll do is I'm just going to hold it so that this half here is open, and I'm able to put some on there. And then once I've done that, so I just move that along like that, and I don't see I just moved it then, but now I'll go over here and I'll finish off that side there. Now what I can do is I can scrape all the excess off and I can put that back in the jar, but if you scrape all of it off you won't get much height or much texture. So that's what we'll do there. So now I'm just going to finish that. I'll scrape my excess back into the pot, and then I'll lift this and you'll see the embossing paste there. So that's the effect that you've got there. Clean up again, water. So what I have, as well as the pot of water that I've got on my desk, I've also got a tray that's about this big that I can then just throw my stencils into, and they'll soak in that water, and then when I've got time I'll go back and I'll give them a wipe over. So that's the effect that you got with that embossing paste. So now we'll use the Cricut stencil, or the stencil that I made using Cricut Images, and we'll just do that one down here. So you can see that I've actually gone off the stencil there. I can come back and I can wipe that off. Okay, so there's that one. Again, I'll lift that up. Now I didn't put a thicker layer on this one, so you can see that one there. Alright, now let's go put that one in the water. So these are some pre-purchased stencils. So again, same thing, through the stencil. I'll put some there and I'll put some here. So you don't have to completely cover your stencil. You can pick the areas that you want to use. Wipe the excess off. And there's that one. And you can see in this one here, I've actually got some areas that are thicker and that some aren't quite as thick there. So it's just, again, different effects. And lastly, I'll use this stencil here. And we'll just use the hearts, I think. Okay. Alright, so there's that one there where I've used the heart stencil. So that's the easiest way to use your texture paste. So some other ways that you can use your embossing paste is to basically just lay some down, and then you can add things to that before it dries. So what I could do is I could lay that down and then just sprinkle some glitter over the top. I can also mix the embossing paste with glitter, and then it's basically glitter embossing paste. So that's another way to do that. But if I tip that off, you can see that whatever's stuck to that embossing paste is going to stay there. Other things that you can do, again, is I'll lay down some embossing paste and you can stamp into it. So I'm going to give myself quite a bit there. And this is all about giving texture to your project. So this could be just building up a background on your project. So now if I take a stamp like here, so this is just a background stamp, and I'm just going to lay that into there and lift it up, and you can see that I've just got the indentation of the stamp there. Now obviously it's not legible because I've used quite a thick amount of embossing paste, but it's just giving you that extra texture, and I can keep doing that all over to get texture. I can also, as I did before with the gesso, I can just use the spatula or the card or whatever it is I'm doing to actually get my own texture. So I can do that. I can draw lines in it, you know, I can do squiggles, anything like that. Again, it's all about just building up a background. So they are just a couple of ideas of ways to use embossing paste. Pinterest and YouTube is just chock-a-block full of ideas. I will put some links to some videos that I think are worth watching for other ways to use these products. But the next thing that I'm going to show you is just some quick ways of how you can actually colour your white embossing paste and your white gesso if you want to. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'll just grab a new sheet of paper to do that. And we'll start with this small one here. Now I'm just going to quickly clean up my surface there. With a wet wipe. Alrighty, so now I'll put that there, and I'm going to get this sheet here. So this is a Tim Holtz crafting mat, and it's great because it's got a really nice smooth surface and nothing really sticks to it, so it's very easy to clean. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab some texture paste and pop that there, and we'll do a few actually so that we can just colour these things in a few different ways. Alright, so I've got that. Now the first thing I'm going to use is an obvious one, and that's paint. So we'll just pop a little bit of paint in there, if it will come out. Okay, so there's my paint. I've just used some very cheap acrylic red paint, and I can mix that up, and I've now got very bright red embossing paste. Okay, so that's one way, and you can see that that goes beautifully on there like that. And again, you can put that through a stencil. Let me just grab another stencil and I'll do that here. Pop that over there, so instead of white embossing we've now got the red. So that's way number one. Next, how else can we colour that? We can use some felt pens. So these are just cheap Crayola pens. You've probably got a bunch of these if you've got an Explorer and you've been trying to work out which pens will work for the writing fonts. So I've just scribbled some on there, and then what I'll do is I'll just get a spatula and I'll grab some of this texture paste here and I'll just rub it in there, and you can see that it's just mixing in there and again comes up beautifully. So there's another way to colour texture paste. Let's have a look and see how that looks. Okay, so there's that one done using Crayola pens. Alright, what else? As I said before, you can mix glitter with your embossing paste, or you can sprinkle it on top. But if I can get this lid off again. Okay, let's try a different one. Let's see how this goes. They don't want to cooperate. Oop. There we go, finally. Okay, so we can sprinkle glitter in there. Again, I'll just mix it in, and what you end up is with glittery texture paste. I'll pop some more in. Okay, so we have a bit of a mix of blue and orange there, so not great, but you get the idea. And let's see how that one goes. Pop that there. Okay, remember this is going to look different once it's dried too. But there's the glitter. So far we've used glitter, we've got Crayola, and we've got acrylic paint. What else have I got here that you might be able to use? Okay, so if you're a Copic person or Spectrum Noir or any of those types of alcohol inks, you can use those as well. So again, you do the same thing, you just scribble onto your sheet and then get your, and we might just wipe this off. So again, so then we'll grab some of this texture paste, rub it in there, and you obviously need to do that before it dries, but if it started to dry out, because it's alcohol ink, you can just re-wet it. So you can use just a drop of what do they call this stuff, rubbing alcohol. So I'll just pop some in there and put that in there, and that's kind of re-wet that alcohol ink. So I can keep adding more, and if I wanted a darker colour, I would just scribble some more on there. So there we go, using that one there. And obviously the more, the more of each colour that you use, the darker the result's going to be. So there's my alcohol ink one there. As also with Copics and most of those alcohol pens, they also come in refills. So instead of using your pen to scribble on, you can actually just get the refill and drop some of that into, let's put one drop in there, give that a stir, and if I want the colour to be stronger, I just add another drop or two, and that will give me that. Okay, so they're two alcohol ink methods. What else can we use? I'm thinking that, and I don't have any, but we could use things like sand and maybe fine gravel, things like that, to just give us the extra texture. But one other thing that you can use, which you've probably got in your kitchen if you like to cook cakes, are the food colorings. So these work really great, and the colors are quite vivid really. So again, you're going to be putting that directly into the embossing paste. Put a couple of drops there, and then we will get another one of these and just give it a stir, and look how pretty that is. So I really like this method because I've used homemade texture paste and then something that most people will have in their kitchen cupboard, and it really comes up quite beautiful. So let's put some of that on here, and that's another way of colouring your embossing paste. You can do the same with your gesso if you want to colour gesso, exactly the same methods. Alright, so let's put that one into soak now, but there's my results, and hopefully all of that was on camera so that I don't have to go through that again. But there's my different results. So this one's going to look really pretty once it's dried because it's got all that nice orange glitter in there. Okay, so that's the different ways of colouring your texture paste and gesso. So hopefully this video was helpful. There are more coming with different kinds of things to teach you, and hopefully you'll stay tuned for those. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.